Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the budget meeting for February the 13th, 2024. As a reminder, this meeting will be live streamed, recorded, and available on the internet by visiting the Town of Parry Sound's website at www.parrysound.ca. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people under the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and the waterways traveled by the Métis of this region. We have yes, yeah, really. We don't have much of an agenda, but I need a mover and seconder for the adoption of the agenda. Councillor Borneman and Councillor Ashford. The special council agenda for February 13th, 2024 be approved as circulated. All in favor? That's carried. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest to the general nature thereof? Seeing none. Okay. We have resolution number, well, it's only one. It's moved by Councillor Borneman, second by Councillor McCann, that the staff report the 2024 budget overview and draft capital budget presentation be received for information purposes, and that council approve the draft capital budget and direct staff to include it in the preparation of the bylaw to set the estimates following the 2024 draft operating budget deliberations. And we will begin with our, yeah, but it says you wanted to say something first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we've got a presentation this evening. There's a number of capital projects that are being approved or recommended for approval this year. However, we do want to focus on getting prior capital projects approved and or funded and completed, as through COVID, there was a bit of a backlog. And before we're asking council to approve a number of new projects, we want to make sure that we can clean up on projects that have been previously approved by council. But we still think that we're meeting the needs infrastructure maintenance wise and municipal safety through this project, through this budget.
Ms. Phillips, the floor is yours. Yeah, I think you wanted your microphone and everything. Yeah, I know, we need to. I think so. Yeah, yeah. There we go.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and public. Welcome to the 2024 draft capital budget presentation and deliberations. Okay. So what's on tonight's agenda? So first, we'll go through what's behind the 2024 budget and then the fiscal policy framework that guides the budget preparation. And I'll take a look at the interest rate and the inflation forecast. Next, I'll mention some of the town's continuous improvement initiatives and describe how we benchmark the town against other municipalities, including providing some benchmarking information from the BMA study. I'll summarize the draft capital budget, and we'll look at how the 2024 capital budget is funded. Then we'll look at some historical information on reserve debenture usage as well as grant funding and property tax funding usage and how that compares to the current budget. And I'll help it to explain what makes up the town's dedicated capital levy. Then finally, we'll go through the recommended draft capital budget items being proposed. Okay, so each year we provide budget training guidance to the managers and share guidelines and expected impacts to assist them as they prepare their budgets. So in the planning stage, then within the review stage, we review those submissions, challenge the inputs, and analyze the budget that's provided. Those budgets are refined and then the results are recommended to council as a draft budget. So tonight's budget deliberations focus on capital, and then next public budget deliberations will take place on March 26th for the operating budget, and that will also include public requests that are brought forward. Following that, there's a bylaw that comes forward to council to establish budget estimates to finalize it. Okay, so the fiscal policy framework. 2 council policies guide the development of the budget. The budget and financial controls policy and the dedicated capital levy increase. So each year, a 1.8% increase is dedicated solely to aging infrastructure. And the 2024 range under the policy for an operating increase is between 3.2% and 6.4%, according to that policy. So over the past few years, budgets have been under inflation. Oh, sorry. They've been under inflationary pressures. So, and staff have typically proposed a budget within the lower end of that range where possible. Okay. So this chart, it includes an interest rate forecast provided as of December 2023, and it shows that bank interest rates are expected to ease through 2024 from 5% to 4%, and inflationary pressures have eased and are forecasted to reach about 2% by the third quarter, so they're expected to become under control. Still, construction price indexes are showing increases though, year over year from 2022 fourth quarter to 2023 the fourth quarter. So that index was 5.5% for non-residential and higher for residential construction. So I mentioned that because that metric is useful to understand inflationary increases on replacement costs of property or capital costs. So capital costs are still experiencing increases. So that's the trends that are going on. So continuous improvement initiatives. So some current initiatives are that the town's worked with the library to replace outsourcing of Wi-Fi and Market Square with town purchase software to save dollars. Mentioning these as we know, we undertake a number of continuous improvement initiatives each year to try to focus on where we can do better. So another initiative is that we extended the Big Sound Marina agreement to include dock shops. Also, our digital work order system is now available and being expanded. So that's used to track service requests and maintenance activities and inspections. We're looking into automated speed enforcement for improved safety. So those are some of the improvement initiatives underway. Oh, and then these are there's some that are ongoing from the prior year. So those include the modernization review items that have been recommended. So those are slowly coming forward. And snowplows are operating with one FTE still, as well as opposed to using a wingman. And then some of these other ones like online burn permits, building and planning department moving application process online. Those are some ongoing initiatives for improved efficiency and service delivery. So these are some things that are currently underway. Okay, benchmarking. So the town participates in the BMA study, which benchmarks against other municipalities. So there's 121 Ontario municipalities that participate right now. Each year we compare the town performance against similar municipalities. So this graph shows the town's reserves as a percentage of own source revenues. The town's reserve balances are doing better than the BMA study average here. So in 2022, it was 140%. The reserves were at 140% of own source revenues. And the town's reserves per capita were 3,192 compared to the average of 1,081. So I was going to mention here that once carry forward projects are completed and the project items for 2024, we expect this metric to be projected around 117%. So that's due in part to some carry forward projects, but it is also going up as compared to our own source revenues. Okay. Any questions about that? Feel free to ask me questions if there are any. Okay. There are, through you, Mr. Mayor, there are reserve funds that are set aside that accumulate interest. And then that interest goes towards the reserves purpose. But the other reserves, they also earn interest, but they go towards the town's general funds. So they all earn interest, but just how the interest allocates is a little different between reserves and reserve funds, but they all are earning interest.
So make sure you do turn your microphones on when you ask your questions so that the public can hear. And Councillor Ashford.
I did want to make a comment of thanks to the staff that as you talked about those initiatives on cost saving, Clayton and I were at a presentation in the summer on streamlining the building process. And the example you gave there with the online building permit was being piloted in a few municipalities with the support of the province. And Parry Sound was able to kind of be standing there as pretty much the only municipality that didn't have provincial support that had already taken the steps to save that cost and find that efficiency to make sure development was able to happen and that we were able to do it at a good price.
Thanks. Okay, so this metric here, this graph shows the town's percentage of own source revenues that go towards interest payments on long-term debt. So it's gone from 1.6% to 2.9% from 2018 to 2022. Much of that is from debt that was previously committed, like within the budget, but takes a while for the projects to complete and things like that. If wastewater was included, the interest as percentage of own source revenues would be 3.1%. This is higher for the town when compared to the municipal average of 1%, but debt levels are still well within limits, with principal and debt repayments projected at 44% of the limit for 2024 if all projects that were planned for debenture were completed and included in that, including pump station 2. So. Yeah. So on to the draft capital budget. So that includes 16.8 million in carry forward projects from 2023 and 7.3 million in new capital projects for 2024 being proposed. So 5.6 million of those are funded from grants, 7.2 million from debenture, that's a carry forward for pump station 2, and 10.5 million from reserve funds. So 756 or close to 57,000 is funded from property taxes within the 2024 budget.
Councilor McCann?
When you mention new projects, what would be some examples of some of the new projects underway?
So once we get a little further into the presentation, we'll go through any changes to the carry forward projects, and then any new projects are within the capital budget. In there as a summary, there's some parks projects and some changes to carry forward projects for Glen Victoria, but we'll get more into those details once we get a little further in. That's okay. Okay, so funding the budget. So this chart shows that how the 2024 draft capital budget's funded. So 41% from provincial funding, 5% federal funding, 13.5% reserve funds, 30% reserves, and 10% current year property taxes. The amount funded from property taxes has increased from 2023 to 2024. So although only 1.8% the dedicated capital levy is going into the capital budget, most of that infrastructure increase is going towards projects in 2024, like within the current year, due to impacts from inflationary or economic factors. So right now, that's how that 1.8% is mostly being used. Yes.
All right, Councilor Borneman?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Phillips, missing on that circle, and maybe, can you tell me where the monies that we're collecting through development charges are hidden in that circle? I didn't understand that part of it.
So the monies that we collected for development charges. So currently, the monies that we've collected for development charges are going to reserve, but there's one carry forward project for pump station 2, and that's partially funded from those development charges, but but since it's a carry forward, it's not showing here as how it's funded, because this is just how the new projects are being funded, but yes. Okay. So on this chart represents the tax supported capital only, so it doesn't include water or wastewater. What it shows is the reserve funding usage over the last couple of years has been decreasing with the exception of 2023, where it increased and then now has reduced again. So in 2024, 1.2 million of those projects were funded from reserve. So that's a little higher than the average here, but lower than in 2023. And total reserves and reserve funds are still projected to be at around 117% of OSR. So thinking back to the chart that we just went through a few slides ago. So this chart also shows tax supported capital only. It shows the current year property taxation applied is above the average at 757,000 approximately. The draft capital budget, though, does not require taxation beyond what's funded from the annual capital levy, including the 1.8%. I mentioned this earlier, just that most of the levy increase is going towards in-year projects within this year. And annual federal and provincial grant funding in the 2024 budget is at the average level of 1.9 million for the year, close to the average. Okay, so how the dedicated capital, where does the dedicated capital levy go? So each year council adopted the policy to allocate tax revenue increase of 1.8% towards infrastructure funding. So in 2024, this generates close to 229,000 overall. And most of that's going to in-year projects for 2024, but reserve contributions are increased by a small amount of 1.6% of how much we were contributing before. So those I'm mentioning are the contribution to infrastructure replacement, to the building replacement, reserve, fleet reserve, and equipment reserve, so those all together. And then these projects on the left of the chart are the tax funded projects within the year that add up to the 757,000. And a portion of the dedicated capital levy goes towards financing principal debt repayment for capital projects. Okay. All right, so if we want to turn to page 8 of the draft capital budget, we can go through. So the first part here is carry forward projects from 2023 to 2024. So I'll mention any projects that include a change from one year to the other. So that means it would either require a little bit more money. So the Wabano Beach playground equipment and Mission Park playground equipment, both of those projects require about 20,000 more, and that's funded from taxation. That's just due to cost increases. And then moving on to page 12, Glen and Victoria. So that project includes storm, water, wastewater, and road. There's a change there of 2.24 million. So of that change, 1.3 million would be funded from water and wastewater reserves. And then 940,000, we're seeking out a grant to try and cover some of those cost increases. And so far, those are just due to industry-wide increases are being experienced for those types of projects. As the engineering design advanced, more was required due to the state of the infrastructure. So just getting further into the project and realizing what needed to be done. Are there any questions about what we talked about so far?
Councillor Ashford?
Just to understand that correctly, when we're looking at Victoria, when we budgeted the 2 million, it's partially because of inflation, but also partially because once we started with the engineering, we realized that it's going to cost us more to do what we thought we could do for a little bit less.
Through your worship, essentially, yes. Unfortunately, we're seeing pretty large increases in costs of major construction projects. This also is a combined sewer repair project. So this has some additional benefits. Besides the actual service on the street, we will be reducing extraneous flows into our sewer system, which will alleviate moving water unnecessarily and treating it unnecessarily as well. So.
Pardon me, within the budget, the 300,000 is planned to be funded through OSIF, so provincial funding. And the next item is a snowplow, so just an additional 8,000 is required for the snowplow replacement, which will be funded from the equipment reserves within the proposed budget. So so on to page 13, Suez IO upgrades. So this particular project is experiencing large price increases and in that quote as well. So 65,000. So that's funded from the wastewater reserves. Water.
Councilor McCann. Well, I wasn't sure what, looked like he paused on that, so.
Yeah, I'm just, the automated speed enforcement. What is that? I think I know what it is, but, what is that all about?
You want Mr. Kearns to answer that?
Yes, I think so, please.
Yeah, through your worship. So automated speed enforcement. And we don't like to refer to it, but formerly probably known as red light or photo radar. Sorry. So it's permitted now in the province and it's used in community safety zones. And essentially, if you're caught to be violating the speed limit, the owner of the vehicle would be issued a ticket in the mail and required to pay the fine.
So this is all to come, and this isn't,
Through your worship, yes, I'm working with bylaw as well. So this is a kind of a cooperative effort because it involves multiple departments.
great, thank you.
Councilor Warner?
I'm just looking at the 2023 projects brought forward, and there are quite a number of them. And it happens with a cost, and I guess the question has to be at some point, why do we have such a number? And how do we reduce that? Because we know delaying these things, it seems, only adds to our price. And I'm sure there's valid reasons in each of them, which kind of takes me to, you know, again, are we putting too much on too few people's table, or how do we resolve these things? How do we fix these things going forward? Because when I look at that bottom line, it's not pretty.
Oh, I'll just defer the question to Mr. Kearns, and
Yep.
I know there's some supply chain issues there as well.
Yeah, through your worship, certainly I can, I'll try and tackle them because I have a feeling that some of those larger numbers lie within our department. Specifically the Glen and Victoria project, as Ms. Phillips mentioned, as we got into the engineering, the state of the existing infrastructure and the location of the existing infrastructure was not well known. And that's contributed. I wouldn't suggest that we just received 90% engineering drawings on those this week. So we have been progressing on them. Unfortunately, when we get into the complicated jobs, they take time to design properly because we don't want surprises after the contracts are let. I'll speak to the retaining walls have been a challenge. We released a tender last year for retaining walls and we're quite shocked with what we got back. So the timing was improper. And what we've attempted to do with this is go to a more robust material And you'll notice on Church Street, it's more of a residential product that was used historically and has not performed well. We do not want to revisit these, so we're going to a more robust construction to make sure it lasts essentially a lifetime. So that's why the increased cost there. So this is more of a ensuring that we do it right this time and don't revisit these again. The snowplow itself, the $8,000 is a slight increase, but that's also perhaps, it could be considered a continuous improvement initiative. That adds a spray bar to that truck as well. So we're moving to a brine. We're going to come back to climate change quite often, and we're seeing this winter in particular. The use of brine versus dry salt reduces the quantity of chlorides by 1/4. You use 1/4 of the amount of chlorides to achieve the same result. So that's where we're heading. So there's environmental benefits, there's cost benefits to those as well. But we don't currently have the infrastructure to be able to apply it. So that additional $8,000 affords us that opportunity in that truck as well.
Okay.
Okay, the next project is water plant gate security. So for this one, it's just that there's 2 gates required, so 25,000 to do added to do both in the upcoming year. And then coagulant bulk delivery system, this is just a quote update for 10,000. So that is the total of the carry forward projects. And there's about 2.7 million, and that's where the changes there. So on to page 15, this is the annual capital expenditures. So these are the types of items that are happen regularly every year. So there's some firefighter pooled gear, PPE, desktop, laptop replacement. 500,000 goes towards the annual paving program and 100,000 towards sidewalks. Traffic light control system replacement, 60,000. Culvert replacements and stormwater, 150,000. And then manhole repairs, 50,000. Water meters, 60,000. And water plant lifts and pumps. So each year they lift one and rebuild or replace. So those are the annual expenditures that happen repeatedly.
Councilor Ashby.
And the water meters are for replacing old water meters people have? Okay, thank you.
Councilor
And-
Keith.
Yeah, so clarity then, for the water meters are replacing the old water meters that people have. I thought people paid for their water meter when they want to have a water meter, so I'm not clear, what's this 60,000 for? Brand new meters for new customers or what? I'm not sure.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these water meters are for upgrading to radio read meters, I think. Yeah, radio read. I'll pass over to Mr. Kearns to provide a little bit more information on that.
Through your worship. So water meters in general have a finite life cycle, service life, but this upgrades to a radio read versus a meter that requires a personal visit to accumulate the data. So as they wear out, we install new meters with radio reads where the staff can drive through town and pick up the water meter readings on an automated basis. These also give us the opportunity to identify leaks for people. They have leak detection technology within them as they're reading, but these are basically replacing meters that are at life cycle with new technology.
Just for clarity then, so if tomorrow somebody wants a water meter, do they then purchase a water meter that has the radio meter in it, so we don't go through this?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Borneman.
Just further to Councillor Keith's, how long will these things last?
Through your worship, without holding me to the time frame, it's about 10 years, 10 to 12 years, I believe.
And they pay for themselves within that period of time?
So the cost of the meters are factored into the pricing cycle, I believe, through the usage rates.
Okay, on to page 16. So these are the new capital projects. So general government, tablets for public works staff. So this is related to the work order system and being able to do inspections and patrols and things to improve that efficiency. Also, there's multi-factor authentication hardware here and mailing machine replacement, which is at the end of its life, over 10 years old. And on to development. So Shoppers Dock, and that's 84,000. This is funded from capital asset replacement reserve. Harbor Walk Shop Hut, that is the purchase of one from the economic development reserve for 10,000. Okay, so under protection services, extrication equipment is included here. 55,000, that's from the equipment reserve. And then analog firefighter pager switch to digital, that's to allow the switch to digital communication. So this is for 20 units, so that's $23,000. And transportation. So there are some significant bridge repairs required for Seguin Street Bridge and Wabano Bridge. So 350,000 for each of those. Micro seal for the roads, so that's budgeted at 256,000. That's to extend the life cycle of the road. Gibson Street,
Counselor Keith?
Just for clarity, I'm wondering for the micro seal for the roads, what sort of distance are we talking about there? Because I don't think it's for the whole of the town, so how many feet or something for measurement, please?
Through your worship, the idea is we planned on sealing the roads that we had recently paved. So there would be Georgina, Park, Joseph, those types of roads. Once asphalt goes down, it begins to immediately oxidize. That's why you get the color change, and that means the asphalt's degrading. Best practices in the industry show that treating the asphalt sooner rather than later will extend the life cycle significantly. So this is a long-term investment in the life cycle of those roads.
Yes, Counselor Keith?
Thank you. Just for clarity then, do those same, if you're trying to extend the life cycle after they are sealed again, how many years are we talking? Another 10 years, or we're talking 2 years? Like,
So through your worship, it will vary depending on the nature of the road. I would say we're expecting 5 to 7 years of extra life cycle by sealing them.
Counselor Warnerman?
So will this be done on a major route like Bow Street and Church where we expended a fair bit of cash quite recently?
Our idea is to make sure we preserve that really expensive asphalt as long as we can. Obviously recognizing we have a lot more work to do as well. So we don't want to forget what we've done while we look forward as well. So.
okay.
Can you?
So Gibson Street retaining well, 175,000 is budgeted there from reserve, and genie lift replacement. So this is from the equipment reserve, 75,000. That equipment we have, it's at the end of its life cycle. Asphalt hot box, 60,000. So that is from from taxes. That's where that's funded. And this item is to improve, service delivery with that different equipment. Salt brine system,
Councilor McCann?
I didn't want to interrupt you there, but so going back, when we're talking about replacing these capital items, and I know we've talked about this before, what happens with some of the stuff they're held for parts or traded in, but for the most part, like with the genie lift, what happens with this equipment? Is it hauled off by a scrap metal collector, or is it, are they saved for parts, or what's put in, how are they repurposed if at all?
So,
I'll refer that to
Sorry.
Mr. Kearns, yeah.
through your worship. So essentially they'd be declared surplus and we would dispose of them. Typically, what we've been doing is using Gov Deals, which is a national organization that will market it. Very little, I don't know that there's any cost to us. Actually, there is no cost to us in doing that. The buyer pays a premium when they pay for the equipment. So it's basically like an online auction that the equipment goes up for. Particularly the aerial lift, using used parts and aerial lift equipment is not advisable. So that's the type of equipment that it gets disposed of as a unit. And should somebody choose to modify it, and that's not advisable either. But once it's disposed of, we're not sure what the people may use it for. They may choose to rebuild it. It may suit their needs at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Harris. Through the mayor, just to add to Mr. Kern's comment, in the last couple of years since using govbids.com, we are getting a better return on surplus assets. I believe there's an item coming up at council next week regarding ambulances, and the price that we get from what we got historically is almost doubled. So it's been a benefit the last couple of years. Good.
Okay, so salt brine system, so, for that one, 37,000 is coming from taxes, and then 18,000 is allocated from salt management reserve, towards that new system. Patrolling application, 32,000, this is to improve, inspections and, record patrolling for risk management predominantly. Plow for, so
Councilor Keith?
Thank you. I'm just, you need to explain it a better way for me or clearer. Patrolling application, I don't understand what that means. Can you advise, please?
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, so that's a software application, but I'll defer it over to Mr. Kearns to speak about the project.
Through your worship. So it's a digital data collection system that we're mandated under their minimum maintenance standards to do regular patrols and periodic patrols through winter, for instance, and identify hazards in our roadways. This allows us to do it in a digital platform where the data is stored, compiled, archived, and retrievable. Whereas historically it had been a paper application. And as Ms. Phillips mentioned, unfortunately, risk mitigation drives a lot of the decisions we make and a lot of the processes that we institute. So it's a digital patrolling application that allows us to require the patroller to fill out very specific information to make sure it's logged and archived.
Okay. So plow for the loader, so that is from the equipment reserve, so that's a life cycle replacement. Shop heater replacement, 21,000, that comes from the building replacement reserve, and that's just life cycle item. Downtown decorative lighting replacement, so 20,000 is budgeted from taxes for those are they street lights? Street light replacement at the downtown. Sidewalk machine sweeper attachment, 18,000 is budgeted towards that. which is, life cycle item. On to environment, oh,
Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, through, Mr. Mayor here. I've heard it a few times, from the DBA. Has there been any, plans to update some of the, power in the receptacles, in the light posts downtown?
Through your worship. Is it that there are some that are not working, or is there a desire to have more available?
I mean, I think from what I've heard, majority of them, don't work, or they've rusted out, or they don't have power to the outlets that they generally have had use of before.
So we can certainly ensure that our contractor takes a look at those and make sure that they're safe and accessible. If they're meant to be there, we want to make sure they're functional as well.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Councillor Keith?
Yes, thank you. Actually, Counselor has just asked part of my question because I've heard the same thing regarding the lighting receptacles not working for the plugins and that. But I also wonder, is it possible, like I know sometimes the Lakeland has had well, I call them deals, but there was an opportunity that we might be able to apply so that there would be less of a cost than the 20,000 for this lighting. Is there any programs like that going on that could at least be looked into, that maybe we could end up not needing to spend the 20,000 down the road?
So through your worship, we can certainly look at it. Typically those programs are for energy efficiencies. This particular item is only doing is only going to look after 10 of the poles this year. So staff's intention was to have it come back. We have about 100 of these units. So we were looking at phasing them in and doing the replacements. What's happening is the actual light fixture inside the light is been phased out. So they're no longer available. When we talked to our contractor, we thought that doing 10 per year as a switch out, they're about $2,000 per unit. We'll take the ones that are obviously not functioning now to start with. I believe we'll have some parts to be able to keep them running over that 10-year period. It's going to take us to switch them all out. So going back to your initial question, these were LED units that were in there for energy efficiencies. So I will have to take a look at it. Normally those programs are when you're upgrading from an incandescent fixture to an LED fixture. I don't know that it'll be applicable from LED to a different LED, but we can certainly take a look at that.
there's, through you, Mr. Mayor, I know there's also I think there's a new red project grant thing coming open too, so I'll also look into that and on whether those would be something that could fall under that too, so, okay,
That'd be great.
yeah. So, on to environmental services. SCADA standard development, so that is 60,000. That's shared between water and wastewater. This is just with system changes and everything to have new standards for the software improvements that we've made.
Councillor Ashford has a question.
Okay.
With the SCADA fund, or with this money going to SCADA, have we fixed our problem with the SCADA system being a proprietary to a company that doesn't really exist anymore, and we're moving into something sustainable? Like, are we SCADA-tastic now, or are we kind of still SCADA okay, or and how does that kind of connect us with I guess we'll just leave it at that. Sorry.
So through your worship, I certainly don't want to get the impression that we have problems. Everything is functioning well. The standard development is to ensure that we are able to spec certain hardware, that we know what kind of parts we're going to use, what kind of software, what those control narratives look like, so that we are not proprietary, so that we can, if we need support in the future, it'll be fairly generic. We can go to any typical provider who will be able to support us. That's where we're heading. Yes.
So Kinsman Park water system, so 12,000 is budgeted towards that, which is a end of life replacement. And then primary clarifier one rebuild, 120,000. This is a wastewater project. And that includes bar screen repair, grit and compactor refurbishment of that item. Inlet works, major repair. Oh, that's the inlet works, major repairs. Sorry. That's 50,000. So that's the bar screen repair, grit and compactor refurbishment. Shower unit upgrade, 5,000. Pump station 6 generator replacement, 200,000 is budgeted there. This has a long lead time for delivery, so. Nothing. Okay, on to health services. So there's a lawnmower replacement here, and that one is with an electric lawnmower, so 30,000 is funded from reserve and then 30,000 from taxation. So, and then new sign at Hillcrest Cemetery.
Council McCann?
Is this one big lawnmower? Is it one of the riding machines, or is this for a fleet of them? For the 30,000.
Yeah, through your worship, this is for a single unit ride-on machine. So when we did trial this unit last year for quite some time to make sure that staff were comfortable, that it was going to be able to adequately tackle our needs, so to speak. So the vendor at the time had said you can mow 8 straight hours. So we've heard very similar sales pitches in the past, but it was proven to be the case. So this leads to some climate change initiatives as well in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The mower is much quieter. There's a lot of benefits to be had. And unfortunately, transitioning to electrification is not a cheap, but there are long-term paybacks. Particularly, we talked about it, this would be within the cemetery. It's not as obnoxious. If there's people in the cemetery, it's quieter. There are no emissions. It charges overnight and provides 8 continuous hours of cutting the next day. So there will be, the idea would be we're replacing a gas unit. So there would be a return presumably on the sale of that gas unit as well.
Hey, great, thank you.
Councilor Borneman?
Well, further to what Councillor Keith just asked you, are there programs? It seems like there are programs available for folks purchasing electric vehicles and such. There are incentives. Are there incentives through the feds or the province in this conversion? And do we have the infrastructure at the cemetery to charge this thing overnight, or is that part of the cost built into the 30,000 here?
So through your worship, we already trialed it there. It plugs into a wall outlet actually. So it's pretty simple. And unfortunately, electrification of fleet and equipment isn't something that seems to be on the table for funding from the various levels of government, but we're always keeping our eyes open to see.
Mr. Mayor, maybe that's something that you could bring forward at the provincial organizations that you belong to, that you know, like if they're serious and they want municipalities to move in this direction, they should provide some incentive to have that happen.
I know
Yeah.
incentives are becoming thinner and thinner lately. Yeah, but you're right. Councilor Keith?
it's again in reference to this electric lawnmower. I'm wondering, is the size of it any different than the size of the gas mower that you have at present?
Through your worship, they're almost identical in terms of cutting width. I think they pretty much are identical. If I could, I'd like to elaborate a little bit more on that overall cost. It's kind of like harkening back to the discussion about retaining walls and that upfront investment. There are no oil changes to be had in this. There are no spark plugs. So when we looked at the payback period, I believe if you were to be cutting 8 hours steady every day, your payback period is about 3 to 5 years. So with a warranty period of 7 years and an expected life cycle closer to 10. So when we looked at all of those things in terms of it's a long-term investment for pretty significant payback right across the board in terms of when you look at all of those things combined.
Keith?
My follow-up though question to that is, one of the reasons I'm wondering about that size, as I understand it, the present more we would have, is transported, is trailered from the one cemetery to the other. So does that mean with this new electric mower, the same trailer would be able to be used? It wouldn't be that now we've got this electric mower, now we need a trailer.
Through your worship, no, that's correct. The idea is we don't need additional equipment to support the use of this new mower.
All right.
Okay, so 9,000 is in here for a sign at the Hillcrest Cemetery. And
Counselor Keith?
Yes, thank you. For clarity, is that one sign 9,000 or are we having two signs at Hillcrest? You know, because of the size of the cemeteries, one sign, $9,000, like.
Through your worship, the intention is to have one arced sign over the main entrance, so it's an ornate metal over the main entrance as one sign.
okay. And then there are 3 ambulance replacements here for 220,000 each. And EPCR hardware for 50,000. This is to replace that in all ambulances. Laptops with tablets. So on to recreation and culture, the BOCC ice making compressor, so that requires a replacement, so it's 180,000 for that. Funded from the building replacement reserve. BOCC ice surface sound system, so 20,000. Proposed within the budget. And then there's some,
Counselor Keith?
Yes, thank you. What's wrong with the system that we have right now? If it would be
through you,
clarified.
Mr. Go defer to you, Mr. Kranz. Yeah.
Through your worship, so there have been quite a few complaints over the quality of the sound system within the BOCC. I can't tell you exactly how old it is. I can tell you that the clarity of the system is questionable. The sound quality is also certainly questionable. So there's a lot of folks that have indicated that it's inadequate for the purpose that it's being used.
Yeah.
So further to that, then, when selecting sound equipment as such for a place like this, does the town consult consultants for recommendations on the best type of speakers and microphones to use and such?
Through your worship, I would say that we have some in-house folks within the community or within the town that have a pretty high level of expertise when it comes to sound, and we will certainly consult those other departments that deal with high high quality sound on a regular basis prior to moving forward. So that way we would hopefully reduce the amount that we have to expend on consultants prior to purchasing the equipment. The folks at the Stocky Center obviously deal with world-class facility and sound, so we would certainly start there.
Sure, I agree. That's a good idea. I'm asking because you're dealing with some pretty unique situations where you have a steel body all around you and flat surfaces, so that yeah, it's a little tricky to make it work.
Okay. So on to the next page. So there are some park playground equipment replacements here. So William Street Park Playground, 100,000. Boot Street Park Playground, 100,000. And Cherry Park Playground, 80,000. Those items are funded from taxation. Some other, so Kinsman Park Spectator Bleachers. It's 50,000, 20,000 of that's planned from the Parks Reserve.
Council McDonald and then Council McCann.
Thank you, Your Worship. Could we get a little, maybe an update or just a high level review of what's the playground equipment would look like compared to what's there now? And I also noticed that the Wabano Beach Playground is not on the list. Is that for another year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have the Wabano Beach Playground, but it's a carry forward item, so it was on there, but it just continues for into 2024.
Through your worship, the idea is to maximize the amount of playground equipment and the accessibility of the playground equipment within the park itself. I'd suggest that we're not probably expanding the footprint necessarily of what's there. It's replacing it with a more modern set of amenities that are accessible to as many people as possible. That's the intention that we're looking at with all of these park playground replacements.
Council McCann?
Thank you. I guess this must include the cost of proper installation throughout the parks. I can just, I recall when the Booth Street Park was put together and largely by volunteers. I can hear the taxpayer saying $100,000 for a couple of riding horses and teeter totters. Is that, it's hard to imagine the cost of industrial outdoor equipment like this that, it has to be rugged and safe, but it sounds expensive, but I know how it adds up. Guess that's a comment more than anything else, unless they're gold lined inside.
Councilor Keith?
I was just going to say, having been on the accessibility committee, I think when we talked about these parks, it also was mentioned about the ground cover. When we're trying to accommodate for accessibility, that ground cover plays a big role in the park also, besides the equipment, and that isn't cheap.
Councilor Borneman?
Questions to Mr. Cairns. I take it that the same principles being applied to playground equipment, picnic tables, bleachers, that we're looking for solutions that are going to last longer and be more user friendly all the way up through the duration of their usages.
Through your worship, yes, of course, we want them to be robust. We want them to be accessible and last. So sometimes the upfront cost is a little higher, but perhaps the operating and life cycle costing is less. We see that with some of the ground cover. You'll see that it's called engineered wood fiber. It's basically wood chips that meets code, but is not necessarily accessible to everyone. Presents challenges. It also presents a lot of maintenance activities over its life cycle as well. Kids kick it out, people play in certain areas and it pushes it out. You have to constantly return to replace it to ensure that the fall protection is there. And again, a big driving force is risk mitigation for us too.
Great.
Okay. Picnic table replacement, 50,000 is budgeted toward picnic tables. And skate park, 30,000 is budgeted towards that, which comes from the Parks Reserve. And tennis basketball court resurface, so 20,000 is in the budget and 3,000 from the Parks Reserve, 17,000 from taxation towards that.
For Ashford?
What are the plans for the skate park redo?
Through your worship. The skate park is kind of it's almost a carryover item. It was, I believe, tabled at the time when we were looking at doing the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. There was plans to replace the equipment within it. We had some issues last year. The steel equipment on the asphalt base is problematic when it gets hot. We actually had to lift and replace or move the equipment last year as there were some hazards at the edges where the equipment was settling into the asphalt. So the idea is to replace it with appropriate equipment for the surface to be able to make it safe and last.
Okay, so that concludes all the new capital projects. Are there any questions about any of the items or anything?
Councillor Ashford?
I do have one, and perhaps at the leisure of the mayor, if it's appropriate or not, because it kind of crosses this meeting and our next. But we're kind of, I presume it's been approved in council meetings past, but we're looking at spending that 70 grand on the cameras, and I think, you know, a lot of the councilors are in support of radar cameras, but I feel like we're double paying here. We're paying the police, right, to police the community and make sure those speeds are down, and now we're paying for cameras to do the same thing. And why is it seems like it's an expense that the OPP might have if they chose to go that way and not an expense that we have. And I don't want to, I'm hesitant in saying that because we want people to slow down. We want to make sure those community safety zones are safe. But at the same time, it's like, we're having a meeting today to spend money, capital to make that happen. And then we're going to have a meeting, budget meeting in a little while to talk about the operating budget where we're paying for the exact same service already.
Thank you.
I'll defer that to Mr. Kearns.
So through your worship, I can comment on it. So we have had conversations with the OPP. The magnitude sometimes of the speeding issues are not manageable given their staffing levels. The resources that they have available won't adequately cover the needs that we have in certain areas of town, for instance. We are seeing this, you probably have seen it in the news recently. Barry's moved forward with very similar things. I'm going to suggest, from my professional opinion, that the expenditure of police resources on controlling speed perhaps are not the best expenditure of their resources when they can be controlled through other means. So this was brought forward by the province, made a tool available to municipalities, and presumably with that thought in mind.
Council McDonald's next.
Thank you, Worship. And just going back to the beginning here, I just had a question as to what is a ready room?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is a project for the fire department that has been on the books for a couple of years. Initially, it was difficult to find contractors to do the work. We're getting through that. We're going to get that done this year, hopefully. What the ready room is it's going to take, right now, all the firefighters' turnout gear is placed around the perimeter of the fire hall. So this creates a couple of issues. First of all, from a health and safety standpoint, we can have firefighters who are getting dressed into their turnout gear while trucks are pulling out of the fire hall right next to where they're standing and doing this. Additionally, the gear is exposed to the environment inside the apparatus bay where the trucks are running, and the gear can pick up the diesel fumes and contain it in the material, which then the firefighters are putting on right close to their face and they're going to be wearing. So a ready room is a isolated room that's going to be independently ventilated, and that's where all the gear is going to be stored. As the firefighters flow into the fire hall on a call, they'll be proceeding to the ready room, getting dressed in that safe space before they spill out onto the apparatus floor to get into the trucks to respond to calls. This is the standard now for fire hall construction. Any new fire hall construction comes with ready rooms. We have the opportunity with our fire hall being relatively modern that we can retrofit it to have this facility in place.
Thank you.
Go to Council Keith, then Council Borneman, then Council McCann.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just going to respond a little bit more to Councillor Ashford's comment and Mr. Karen's response. Being on the Community Policing Advisory Committee, we know that we get OPP service billing, and when one looks at the costs involved and understanding how the servicing occurs, it's not, in my viewpoint, it would not be the best way or most efficient way for us to be paying bills for having an officer sitting at the traffic lights waiting for people, for example, who are speeding. We've already seen when there has been concerns about people speeding at various hours on the street, and then the Public Works Department has put up the monitors to see what the speeds limits were and how excessive they were. We found out overall, it would appear that the frequency is very limited of when this is happening. And again, I would say we're not getting the best value for a buck if we want a police officer sitting out there waiting for when somebody goes speeding down X road. So I think this automated system in community zones is probably the most efficient use of our own tax dollar. And the police also have a number of other tasks and they have to prioritize them, what they need to do. So I think we have to look at what's a good balance here.
Council Borneman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just gonna say much of what Councillor Keith just did. You will recall that a number of years ago that we had some issues in the downtown core, and we did hire over and above the contract that we had with the OPP. We did hire extra duty officers. It's always at an overtime rate, which adds to the cost. And I think that, you know, this heightened use of technology is happening in urban centers across the country, not just with respect to traffic issues, but with respect to surveillance of, you know, major downtown cores and arteries and whatnot as a crime prevention method. So I think this is kind of a little bit of a canary in the coal mine test case. If it works for us here, perhaps it works for us in other areas at some point in the future.
Well, I do know it's working in other communities and it's working very well. So, you know, the other step is red light cameras or stop sign cameras as well. Because there are a number of people that just aren't stopping. So. Councilor McCann.
Thank you. and we've often sat here and asked people to slow down and we observe the traffic rules and regulations, and I feel like we're just preaching to the choir. But money seems to be the one thing that gets everybody's attention, and so you get a ticket in the mail that costs you a little bit of bread. Think twice about speeding the next time around. But what I wanted to say and ask, and everyone's right, we're just following through on what other cities and towns are doing. I read that good, bad, or indifferent, it's an awful way to think of revenue, but I've read where in some of these cities, the especially the red light cameras, when it issues a ticket, the revenue that comes back from the fines ultimately pays for the system that puts it in, or at least it returns a fair, decent cash flow. Is that the case here, or would be as well with the photo radar?
Through your worship, ideally, we don't want it as a revenue tool. And because we want folks to follow the traffic laws.
Of course. Yeah.
Now that being said, it certainly can be a revenue generating tool if people choose not to follow the traffic laws. What I've seen too, most times those revenues will go into a reserve fund to support traffic safety initiatives in the community. So, and there's certainly no shortage of those that we could take advantage of. So should people choose to fund that for us, we in Public Works could certainly find lots of traffic safety initiatives to invest that money in.
So in summary, then, as you say, it's not the kind of revenue you'd like to keep your city running on. But the good news is, it slows people down, it makes it safer. And if that's what it takes, and ultimately we put more safety systems in place, maybe it's not a bad idea. And you see the big picture.
Correct. And ideally we'd see diminishing returns. Then the system would be effective.
Okay, is there anything else in regard to what we've been presented tonight? Councillor Ashford?
Sorry, Mayor, I have a terrible one that's kind of been on my mind a little bit since I read this. It has to do with pump station number 2. And I understand we need number 2 and we gotta get this sorted. But my question becomes, do we need to pay for number 2 in the way that we are? Because it is gonna cost us a lot for in the long term, and we're kind of saddling ourselves in a certain way. And I feel like at one sense, we're taking the heat off of the province to provide the funding that's required for the infrastructure to accelerate the housing development in Ontario. So by moving forward on this in the way that we are, in one sense, we're giving the province an out where we need the houses and they're kind of there to help do that. And I worry that if we move forward on this today, is it sending the right message to them that we really need this money and it shouldn't be saddled on the taxpayers for this period of time in this particular way?
So before Mr. Harris comments, we have to do it. It's a chicken and an egg thing. There's nothing stopping the province or for us getting money from the province to add to the project, even though we have it in the budget and we approve it going forward. Nothing stopping the province from giving us the money we've asked for. So, and it can be changed. We can modify it down the road as to whatever we get and how that goes. Mr. Harris, you go ahead.
Thank you. Just to add to what the mayor indicated, we know it's a $7.2+ million project. So we put that out there so everybody's aware of that, that end cost, but we're approaching this in steps. The first step, and Mr. Kearns and the consultants are finishing the design. And, the design is less than $1 million and we're going to complete that. Regardless who pays for it, that work needs to be done. The next step is apply for environmental permits for the construction and the route where the force main would go to the plant. That could take anywhere, 6 months to a year. So we're not committing and issuing debentures today. We did make a delegation to the Minister of Infrastructure at the Roma conference. In the briefing document that we provided, we indicated that if this project isn't built, the full development that's potential, it's in the harbor and the whole catchment area of Pump Station 2 may not happen. In that document, we articulated the town's limitations in its debt capacity and, putting the province on notice that we're not sure we've got the capability to do this on our own. We're certainly moving ahead that it can happen, but we haven't made the final decision, and that, depending on the town's finances, we heard tonight that the work on Glen Avenue increased by $2 million. We just had to be cognizant of what we commit to, because when you commit to a debenture, it's 30 years. It's not paid off in two. It's you're locking yourself in a certain way for a very long period of time. And there's subsequent to our meeting with the minister, we also got notice, we were advised that we'd be getting something, and we've received notice that a funding program tied to more housing, infrastructure for more housing. And we were encouraged to apply for that, and Mr. Kearns has taken the lead. So we're doing everything to give the province a signal. We're not necessarily going to do it. We're being ready for it to happen. Presumably, I wouldn't bank on this, but presumably perhaps the developers that benefit from it might do some front ending. We did float that a number of months ago, and it didn't seem to get a lot of traction. We are collecting monies from fees and charges in addition to the debt. So when it comes time to issue the debt, it wouldn't be this full 7.2, it'd be something less than that. But we're hoping that we get some provincial funding. We're really actively, aggressively pursuing that.
Just, we're not the only municipality in the province in this position for trying to create or trying to upgrade infrastructure for housing development. It's right across the province. And I hear that all the time, whatever. And when we were notified about the grant program, immediately it went to staff so that we could begin to apply for whatever might be there. We don't know.
Just again, to build on the mayor's point, everybody wants money for more housing, and there's not enough money to go around. So what we try to do is really differentiate our request from the others. And I think the big benefit for the province is the cleanup of the brownfields in Parry Sounds Harbor.
Yeah.
With the sewage treatment, or with the Pump Station 2 enlarged, that means all those lands can be fully developed. For them to be developed means they have to be cleaned up. We're in the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. It's an important environmentally sensitive area. Getting the housing and a cleanup is a bonus. And so that, we think, sort of really differentiates the town's request from many others. In that, we got a letter of support from the Biosphere. They're very supportive of this, as well as the archipelago.
Councilor Gordon.
Mr. Harris, is there any way of utilizing the private sector in our attempts to raise the issue with the province?
I've provided a copy of our briefing document to one of the major developers so that they're aware, and if they're in any conversations they're having, they can raise it. We've raised it with our MPP so that he's aware of the developments, the specific developments that are happening, and any conversations he might be having where they might be looking for other kinds of support. We're just trying to get it out there to everybody that might have an interest in moving this forward.
Okay. Counselor Ashford?
I think I think a little bit of my fear with this is that all of our staff are doing such an exceptional job. And everything's being presented in such a proper, authentic way. And our finances are doing so well that somewhere in Northern Ontario, there is a town who is not doing this. And their application for the money is going to sit next to our application. And if they don't get the money, their town is going to burn down. And they're going to go, well, we got to give them to them. Parry Sound's got it going on. They're going to be able to work it out on their own. And I just wonder, like, what do we need to do to show that? And I think you've answered it. I think you've answered all these things that we've already done. But there's just this part of me that thinks, like, what? We're almost doing so well to mitigate all the risks and everything where it's going to the point where, like, is comparatively to another community, we might just be doing a great job out of our way out of the money in that sense.
So I'll start, and then I'm sure Mr. Harris has more to add on to it. We are doing everything that the province requires. Okay, we have a capital asset management plan. We have, our other plans that we have to have or whatever in place. We've done the projected development, that sort of thing. We have done everything that the province has asked. That, when the province asks for all those things and we've got those systems and management systems in place, we are supposed to be moved to the front of the line. Okay? Municipalities that don't do that are moved to the back of the line. The incentive is to try and get those municipalities to come up to speed with those other municipalities like ours that have all those systems in place that make us accountable, okay, for what we have and what we would get and how we would spend the money. If you don't have those systems in place, again, you fall to the back of the line because the province isn't sure what you're really going to do. They don't know whether you really need the money and they don't know how you might spend the money. So this, which the town has done over the past, I'm going to say 10 years, has brought us to the forefront where we are eligible and we should be eligible. And if we're not, then it's not anything that we've done. It's something in the system that's beyond us, but we should be right there for any financial money that is out there. And Mr. Harrison.
Again, just to build on what the mayor said, I think that's very true. The province has set an aggressive target, 1.5 million homes by 2031. As much as they'd like to help some of those struggling municipalities, like you said, might be out there asking for money, they also need to have results. And if they don't have results, if they've given up money and don't have results, they haven't achieved their goals, and that'll be a concern to them. So what the mayor was saying, we've done a lot, and I think you've alluded to that, to show that we can deliver. To the extent that municipalities have control over development, we can deliver. When I spoke with our Graydon Smith, our member of provincial parliament, following the delegation, he was impressed because we had provided a map of imminent development. He thought that really made the case. We're not talking maybe, perhaps. We had a list of what we termed imminent development. And I think there was, maybe close to a dozen properties, a number of homes. And we know there's a lot of development interest, whether it's the former Shell property, the Imperial Oil property, and a number of other properties in that area. And so these are real projects that are at various stages of interest in developing in town. And so creating a high degree of confidence that we've got to give the money to somebody. If we give it to the town of Parry Sound, there are a number of developments that can proceed with the money and won't proceed without that money. So we're trying to create a sense that there's those additional benefits like clean up a major brownfield environment that those lands have been vacant for 50 years. Town, there's a number of developers that are just waiting for this capacity so they can develop. So try to create, they're gonna benefit by banking on us, by funding us, the town of Parry Sound, because we can deliver. And they're gonna get bigger bang for their buck because of the environmental cleanup.
And I'm hoping because of all that work, that's why the Ministry of Infrastructure sent me an email saying, here's a grant coming available. You know, that sort of thing, which immediately went to staff to say, hey, we need to apply. So, Mr. Kearns.
Yeah, further to that, your worship, staff have been attending there's been various webinars ongoing for this, Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund, as it's referred to. I'll quickly go through this just so, because it complements everything that's just been said. To be eligible for the funding, projects must include a capital component and may include pre-construction planning and design work, which is what we're doing right now. It must enable housing development, which we can clearly articulate. Have a clear start and end date. We have that. Start no later than September 2024. We've already embarked on the pre-construction planning and design work, so we're already there. Has to be completed by 2027, and that's certainly within a feasible time frame for this project. Be in the process of or completed the design and planning phase. So we're done the planning phase and well underway on the design phase, and meet all relevant provincial regulatory requirements. So we've done archaeological studies. We're doing the environmental studies. We check off every box that they say we must. So just further to that entire conversation, it's very important to know that there's a reason why we think we fit like a glove.
We dotted our i's and crossed our t's. Yeah, Councilor Borneman.
Well, the old saying was shovel ready.
Yeah.
And we're there. We've checked off the boxes and there are developers in queue to spend their hard-earned money. So I think we've done what we should be doing.
Councilor Keith. And then-
I would just add to that, because that's where I was thinking as the speaking was going on. We've proven ourselves in the past, having sat in council for some terms now, where we were shovel ready, and because we were shovel ready, we got the money to do the projects. I don't see this as any different. The governments want you to tick off a number of boxes. You got to tick them all off, because I think in the end, everybody likes a good news story. So I think it's a win-win situation when everybody's done the right thing, because it shows, hey, that community got it because they did A, B, C, and D, and it's a role model for somebody else. And we have been a role model different times in the past for communities. So I think this is an opportunity again for us.
Yep, exactly. Councilor McCann.
So we've been talking, for instance, this pump number 2 and upgrading it so that it can handle the capacity in the future. I'm just wondering, and maybe I'm missing something, but Mr. Kearns, tell us what an upgrade would look like to so Joe Blow on the street. Do you have to dig up more pipes in the ground that have a wider circumference to handle the extra load? What, maybe just like in a very short, brief paragraph, what does an upgrade to pump number 2 look like that's going to work for us for the next 50 years?
Through your worship, they're not very exciting on the exterior. I'll say that.
I've seen that.
Pump station number 2 over on Champagne Street, the building itself, what you're looking at may be twice the size. It's a very small building as it stands now. Most of the infrastructure ends up underground and the supporting infrastructure above ground. So what it ends up being is a new force main all the way to the sewage treatment plant. Currently number 2 ties into the force main from our largest lift station, which is not a great design feature. So we're overcoming some of the shortcomings in our existing system by doing that. Bigger station, more pumps. There's 2 pumps in number 2 now. There would be 3. It's a standard in terms of redundancy and capacity. So a little bit bigger on the outside, but kind of the the meat and potatoes is all behind closed doors, so to speak. So,
And then just as a footnote then to that, then we've often heard that rainwater gets into the sewage and such. And when you get a significant rain event, that the pump can't handle it. Is this something that an upgrade can handle with no problem at all?
well, we design it appropriately, but our goal is ultimately to remove as much as that extraneous flow into our system as we can. So we don't have to move it. Even if we had the capacity to move it, it's highly inefficient. A lot of expenditures, wears out pumps if you're moving rainwater that doesn't need to be moved. So ideally, we get that out of the system. The pump station itself isn't really related to that, but that was where I was speaking of Glen and Victoria is a combined sewer. That's a direct impact on moving water that we don't need to. So
Yeah, great. No, thanks.
Mr. Harris?
I just wanted to add to the conversation. We talked about the Victoria Avenue, Glen Avenue work. In terms of the application, we're thinking of adding not only pump station 2, but the work on Glen Avenue. So it's a $15 million application, not a 10. If they give us 2/3 of what we're asking for, that's good. But we're those are two major projects that have, significant benefits, and we're gonna be applying for those two as part of this round.
Just, I'm sorry, one more. So the pump station at the end of Prospect Street, what is that actually doing then?
that's through your worship. So that collects all of the sewage in that entire area down Wavick Street, Prospect. That's pump station number 9. There is a divide around Wood Street, I'm thinking on Isabella, kind of in that general area from everything from there essentially flows into Prospect. It pumps right up here to the corner, just past the tracks, and then it gravity feeds down into number 6. So when Wabick Street was completed, staff noticed a significant improvement in terms of the amount of inflow and infiltration. So all of these, that's where the benefits of these reconstruction projects come to fruition in terms of freeing up capacity, reducing wear and tear, reducing expenditures and power consumption because we're not moving water we don't need to, but it pumps everything from that entire area. So Glen and Victoria would flow into Prospect Street as well. It does now. Unfortunately, it takes a fair bit of stormwater with it. So
I recall back in those days, so if you had a water main break, you try to put a Band-Aid on it. There was no solid piece of pipe to cement it to, I suppose. So it made fixing water mains very difficult. So that's good to hear.
Anything else? All in favor of the resolution then? That's carried. Thank you. So that means we're adjourned. Thank you.